We have really good news to talk about here.
Our life has improved for the better. I mean, we couldn't believe it.
It is, for the most part, preventable. That's the take-home message.
Hello, I'm Peggy Sarlin, and today I'm in the Medical Research Laboratory of the University of South Florida in Tampa, speaking with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino and Dr. Angela Poff about how tomorrow's research can help you start reversing Alzheimer's and dementia today. Now, Dr. D'Agostino and Dr. Poff are at the forefront of a whole new field of medicine that's rapidly exploding called ketogenic nutrition, which holds the promise of reversing, preventing, rolling back a host of neurodegenerative diseases and even cancer. Dr. D'Agostino is an associate professor in the Department of Molecular Pharmacology and Physiology, and Dr. Poff is a research associate. So welcome, Dr. D'Agostino. Welcome, Dr. Poff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Great to be here.
So, my first question. Dr. D'Agostino, you've compared the brain to a hybrid engine. Why is the brain like a hybrid engine, and how does that impact your research?
Okay, the brain's a pretty unique organ. It has a very high metabolic demand. So approximately 20 to 25% of the energy that the body makes is consumed by the brain. And it only occupies maybe about 3% of our total weight, right? And historically, we thought of the brain being exclusively fueled off glucose or sugar. And it wasn't until really the early 60s that the work at Harvard Medical School by Dr. George Cahill and colleagues demonstrated that the brain has the metabolic flexibility to adapt from using glucose to using ketone bodies for energy. And this evolved out of work he did studying starvation in man. And a good example is when we fast. Under the periods of fasting, when we go without consuming food, in particular carbohydrate-based food, we liberate fat for energy. So we're burning fat very efficiently for energy, but the stored glucose in the form of glycogen gets used up. And our body converts the fat into ketone molecules. So then you get, over the course of a week, a slow conversion of using glucose to using ketone bodies for energy. And by the end of the week, we're primarily 60 to 70% of our energy is being derived from ketones in a fasted state. So this was discovered in the early 60s, and it kind of revolutionized how we thought about the brain and the brain energy metabolism.
So most people run their brain, their very metabolically active brain, which is using up 20% or so of their body's energy, they run it on fuel of glucose, which is sugar. But if you have Alzheimer's, or if you have dementia, or perhaps even another brain disorder, does that mean that your body is not able to use the glucose? Why then is your work with ketones important for brain function or dysfunction?
So as we age, the brain's capacity to use glucose for fuel declines. And there's a number of reasons for that. As it pertains to Alzheimer's disease, they think the pathological hallmarks of Alzheimer's, the amyloid plaques, the tau plaques that we hear about and from the science journals, they may impede or impair glucose energy metabolism. Conversely, one could say that it could be the defect in glucose metabolism that contributes to the actual pathology of the Alzheimer's disease. So that actually may cause the brain to accumulate these toxic protein plaques, amyloid beta. So as we age, there's different forms of dementia. So, and dementia is kind of separate from Alzheimer's, and that's another discussion. But one thing that's kind of similar is that there's an age-related decrease in the ability for the brain to use glucose for energy. So ketone bodies represent an alternative energy substrate that can help to restore brain energy metabolism in the face of this impaired glucose utilization. And a good example of that would be that if you take people with mild cognitive impairment and even advanced cognitive impairment with Alzheimer's disease, and you do what's called a glucose PET scan or an FDG PET scan, it shows it's very dim. So the intensity of the fluorescent image that you're looking at is much less bright in someone that has Alzheimer's than compared to a normal healthy person. And that's indicative of impaired glucose energy metabolism. So that's a hallmark, really, of neurological diseases in general, especially age-related cognitive dysfunction disease. So we think that that this understanding and emerging science has been demonstrating that as we age, our capacity to use ketones does not decrease with age. Actually, it can increase and help facilitate. Work by Stephen Cunnane, who just presented at our Metabolic Therapeutics Conference, gave an elegant talk showing that brain glucose or sugar utilization decreases with age, but that's not the case with ketone bodies. They can rapidly transport across into the brain and be used as an energy source. And the processes associated with aging do not seem to impair those transport or utilization of ketones at all. So they represent a preferred fuel in the aging phenotype, we say, in the aging brain.
Okay, so that's a key concept here for the work that you're doing. So, Dr. Poff, just help us understand this a little bit more. The youthful brain does great with glucose. Is that
Pretty much, yeah.
And that's the preferred fuel for a youthful brain?
So a youthful brain will utilize ketones if they're present. But the studies have shown that in young individuals, the kind of use of glucose compared to the use of alternative fuels, such as ketones or something, is very, very high. But as Dr. D'Agostino was saying, in an aged brain, and especially someone with dementia, that the use of glucose is dramatically decreased compared to the use of alternative fuels, suggesting that there's an impaired ability for the brain to actually utilize glucose.
So one understanding then of Alzheimer's, one way to look at it is it's a fuel problem.
Yeah.
And the brain needs fuel. It needs, and if it's not accessing glucose in an efficient way, it's all these other bad things start happening. Is that correct? That's one way to understand Alzheimer's. It's a
Yeah, but even the young population, like ketones are not something that comes to save the day. I mean, we're born in ketosis. Like babies, our basic breast milk has a type of fat, medium chain triglycerides, which we can talk about, that convert to ketones. And babies are generally in a state of mild ketosis. So it's something that we're already hardwired to use as an energy source. But we're more receptive to the benefits of it as we age, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
And from what you're saying, it sounds like it's almost a natural process. The brain ages and decreases in its ability to efficiently use glucose, but retains the ability to use ketones efficiently. And so then our task is, if we're dealing with an Alzheimer's patient or a dementia patient, as you said, there's other kinds of dementia, or somebody who may have mild cognitive impairment, then we want to promote ketones as fuel for their brain. So how do we do that? There's the art of it. What do we do?
Yeah, so that's what our lab is all about, right? We're developing and testing ketogenic diets that are kind of modified versions of the original kind of ketogenic diet that was developed in the 1920s and developed at Mayo Clinic and later implemented by Johns Hopkins University and many clinics across the United States and across the world, actually. And we develop a means to induce therapeutic ketosis independent of the dietary restriction that's accompanies a ketogenic diet. So which means that we develop ketone supplements that could be consumed orally that elevate blood levels of ketones into ranges that have been shown to be therapeutic in studies where the diet was used. So we know that the ketogenic diet is a very powerful metabolic therapy, and we think that ketone supplementation can make this more accessible to the people who have difficulty adhering to a very strict dietary regimen to produce ketosis. So the ketogenic diet needs to be implemented by a trained dietitian under the care of a medical doctor, and it's a lifestyle change. Whereas we think we can derive much of the benefits through supplementation. And perhaps the best approach would be to use a modified version of a low-carb ketogenic diet with supplementation. So we're doing the diet studies by itself, we're doing ketone supplements with a standard diet, and we're doing the combination of a modified ketogenic diet with ketone supplementation. And we're adjusting and doing dosing studies to determine what is optimal in the models, the experimental models we're looking at.
So when we're dealing with somebody who has Alzheimer's or has dementia, our goal is to increase the level of ketones in their body, which are going to serve as brain fuel and get that brain recharged again,
Absolutely.
firing.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, from what you're saying, we're going to promote a way of eating, which we can talk about, but on a practical level, we can here's a capsule, here's a pill, here's a tablet, here's something you can put in your mouth today that is going to start promoting ketones and alternative fuel sources for your brain, right?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Tell us about some of the supplements. Show us some of the supplements.
Okay.
What can we do for our loved one?
Okay, so when this whole topic is introduced to people, ketones have gotten a negative connotation in medicine. So I'm taking a small step back. It's important to acknowledge up front that nutritional ketosis is very distinctly different than diabetic ketoacidosis, which is a very specific pathology associated with the absence of insulin or type 1 diabetes. So most doctors, when you talk about ketone supplements or the state of ketosis, they're going to bring up ketoacidosis.
So let me just stop you right
yes.
there. So if you've got your loved one that
Yes.
you're trying to help with the fuel, and you say, let me take, okay, I heard about ketogenic diet. I want to help them. Let me consult my doctor. Chances are excellent. Your doctor is going to say, "Oh no.
Yes.
This is a pathology associated with diabetes, and
Yes.
don't go there."
Ketones have gotten a bad rap as something that only presents itself in the blood under a very pathological condition. But we couldn't survive famine. We couldn't survive starvation without getting into a state of fasting ketosis, because the ketones, when we fast, I talked about that, a week of fasting elevates blood ketones. If our blood ketones did not get elevated to supply energy to our heart and brain, we would break down all the amino acids in our muscle tissue to make glucose. And we would quickly waste away and die within probably 2 weeks.
So that's the muscle wasting.
That's the muscle wasting.
Yeah, that's so dangerous.
So
this
ketones are different.
burns away fat,
Exactly.
which we don't want.
Byproducts of fat metabolism.
So
yeah.
that sounds much more appealing to burn away fat than muscle.
Yes.
So, okay, but
So-
we're going back to you're going to go to your family doctor and you're going to say, "Oh, I heard Dr. D'Agostino and Dr. Poff, and there was this really cool diet." No, says your doctor. No. So what are you going to tell and show them, and how are you going to get your doctor on your side?
Google's a good term, and if you, for a doctor, I would say go onto PubMed, which is the main, access portal to science, and type in ketogenic diet and then brain, and you'll get about 2,000 hits of ketogenic diet, and about 2/3 of them are related to brain health, and the other 1/3 are kind of like fat loss and anti-inflammatory effects. So tell your doctor just to do a Google search on ketogenic diet, go to PubMed if he wants to see peer-reviewed studies on the diet, and encourage him to go to the Charlie Foundation, which is actually a foundation with 200 clinics around the world that help people implement the ketogenic diet, and they're associated with Johns Hopkins University with some heavyweight neurologists backing it up. So that may convince them that the diet is not some fad diet for, that has come and gone. It's been around for almost a century, for 90 years, for specifically managing epilepsy, and in pediatric populations and also adults. And in the last 10 years, there's emerging applications of the ketogenic diet for other neurological disorders. So that's what our lab is interested in testing. My main focus really is seizures. But now I didn't realize after studying the diet that it had all these other applications, because simply what you're doing is energizing the brain and providing better resilience to the brain under pathological conditions, and under certain scenarios where brain energy is compromised. And that's what we study. So the ketones represent a source of energy that can make the brain run better. And that's important information to convey to your doctor, that a ketone is like a water-soluble fat molecule that the brain can use for energy equally or even more efficiently than glucose. And he's probably not aware of that, but he should look at the Harvard study that was done in 1967 by Oliver Owen and George Cahill, who really wrote the book on the way, we understand brain energy metabolism. And from that perspective, I think the doctor may acknowledge that it's a legitimate metabolic therapy. And there's a lot of resources and tools out there to educate the doctor on that. There's a book, I think I may have it, by Johns Hopkins. Eric Kosoff and John Freeman are the authors of this book, and this was the first book that I ever encountered. There's newer versions now. Now it's the ketogenic diet for the treatment of epilepsy and other disorders. So the new version of the book. But this was like kind of like the Bible, and then there's a number of other books out there. This is the 4th edition. I think they're up to 5 or 6 editions now. And this covers kind of the whole implementation of the ketogenic diet as a medical therapy. So under the supervision of a trained nutritionist and a doctor. Now, someone who's a little more savvy with their diet and can count grams of protein and grams of fat and grams of carbohydrate may be able to implement it themselves with it after a short consultation with a nutritionist. But they should always seek the resources first before attempting to try the diet, because it does really change your physiology in a way. If you think about an engine burning gasoline and trying to switch it to diesel or switch it to electric, as in a hybrid engine, there's changes that take place. The body needs to make pretty remarkable changes to run efficiently on that fuel, and that's kind of the struggle, if you will, that someone may have getting into a state of nutritional ketosis with the diet. But now, we've developed various ketone supplements that can help ease that transition into nutritional ketosis. And it could be as simple as coconut oil, which has a type of fat that converts over to ketones much more readily. And within coconut oil, there's a particular kind of fat called a medium chain triglyceride. And these can be purchased at any health food store, and they can be incorporated into food. Some people put it into their coffee. You can make salad dressing out of it or just take it straight. And when they're consumed, you have an elevation of ketones for several hours. And that's basically giving your brain a source of energy. And one diet that Johns Hopkins implements is the modified Atkins diet or modified ketogenic diet, where they incorporate medium chain triglycerides into their ketogenic diet meals. And that has helped with epilepsy, and it would help with other disorders or even weight loss, or just different
It burns
applications
fat.
for
We're
it.
going back to
Yes.
being in a state of ketosis
Transitioning your body to burn fat.
will burn the fat and not the muscle.
Yeah,
Let's
exactly.
see some of your supplements that you developed, because these may be practical ways for people who are giving care to somebody to. I interviewed
So-
Dr. Mary Newport,
Yes.
who really got remarkable results with her husband who had Alzheimer's with
Yes.
coconut oil, and she told us about how she incorporates this into a daily diet in many different ways.
Coconut oil is fantastic. Within coconut oil, there's a type of fat called medium chain triglycerides, and that's a 8 and 10 carbon length fat. And that is you can buy a more concentrated form as MCT oil.
MCT oil. And
this is a powder. Yeah.
And that coconut oil is a powder? I don't know if I've seen that before. It says coconut oil powder. Does
it's
it look
pretty
like
new.
flour?
It looks, just like flour. You can I put it in my coffee. You can incorporate, you can make a shake out of it.
I did not know.
It's
that
new.
it came- it's brand new. And
So
Quest
Nutrition, yeah, they
Nutrition.
make it, and there may be other companies out there, but I think they were the first to come to market with an MCT oil and a coconut oil in a powder. And I travel a lot, so these go with me frequently on my trips. So they represent a very dense source of calories that can boost ketones that I can travel with instead of messy oils and everything. So these
That's
are things
great.
that we use in the lab, and I use personally and recommend to
Can I
others.
go to a health food store? Where am I going to get Quest
Yeah.
coconut oil powder?
I was actually surprised. They quickly got it into, I was in Nutrition Smart. I think they were all over the place. And I think GNC may also carry both of these products. And they kind of represent a naturally derived fatty acid and natural source or means to further elevate ketones.
So this is being used by the brain as a fuel, and as Dr. Newport discussed with us, you need to keep fueling your car, as an example, because
Yeah.
you run out of fuel. So this isn't something you give and then a week later you give again.
No.
This is something that you...
It's calories, it's a food, it's a source of energy. So like I said, I put it, in my coffee every morning. You can incorporate it into shakes. The oil, goes nicely. You can cook with coconut oil, obviously, and you can make salad dressings and put MCT oil or coconut oil on things.
That's great.
So this is just one means to elevate ketones. So under the funding of the Department of Defense and the Office of Navy Research, we've developed other ways to elevate ketones, and we've developed synthetic molecules that are ketone esters. And Dr. Newport may have talked about this, and she's published an article, a case report on her husband about it. So these represent the synthetic and naturally derived ketone bodies that we're doing research on can elevate ketones 2 to 5 to even 10 times higher than the MCT and the coconut oil. So they represent sort of these new technologies that they're
even
actually
more efficient.
new entities. Yeah, they're new
Do
molecules.
you have them here? Is this something that's on the market?
There's not, the ketone esters not on the market yet.
Coming.
They're in the realm of the military for our
I
special
see.
operations community,
I
the
see.
Navy SEALs. So we've developed them to make our physiology more resilient under hyperbaric conditions, and we do a lot of studies in the chambers that you see around here. So we've developed these technologies to enhance our warfighter performance and safety. And out of these technologies that we developed molecules that are essentially naturally derived ketone bodies that are salts. So we can take a ketone molecule and combine it with sodium or potassium or magnesium or calcium. And these salts have the interesting property of elevating ketones a little bit higher than the MCT and higher than the coconut oil. And these have been commercialized and are on the market now. So
And what are
there's-
they called? Do you have them here?
Yes,
Can we look
they're.
at them?
I don't have them actually right here, but I can tell you the companies' names are. There's about 3 companies out there. One is Keygenix, one is Prove It, and another is Forever Green. And they have communicated with our university and actually gotten a license to develop products that use this technology, use the ketones into their product. So their product may have other ingredients, but they incorporate the ketone salts, which are combining it with natural sodium, potassium, calcium, and when they're ingested, it liberates the ketones and it's elevated in the blood. and they can be
And
consumed.
what are the products called? Or it's just we go to those names?
Yeah, Keto OS, I think, is one of the products. Ketogenics that's the name of the company, and the product is actually called Ketogenics. And I think Forever Green is Ketopia.
Wow,
Ketopia, like,
great.
you know.
Like Utopia.
Yeah, Ketopia.
That's, so,
And they're all about the same because I've tested them myself,
uh-huh.
and I do a lot of testing in the lab personally, and we do a lot of studies in various animal models. And they elevate ketones above and beyond what you can get with the MCT products, and they taste good.
Oh,
so
this
the
all
ketone
sounds
esters
great.
don't taste good.
Oh, they don't taste
This
good.
is
No, we want the
synthetic,
stuff
yeah.
that tastes good and works
Good.
better.
Yeah.
And I think, it's encouraging when you're thinking, well, is this going to work for a loved one or whatever? This is apparently what's going to make a Navy SEAL's brain perform more efficiently. So maybe it can help your loved one's brain with other brain challenges. That's good to know. So, Dr. Poff, you are doing research in the field of cancer.
Right.
And this kind of in ketosis.
Yes.
So that's kind of thrilling. How does that work? That's a completely new idea, I think, to many people.
I think it is, but it's a really exciting field, and I've been in it for about 6 years now, and the amount of research going on in ketogenic diet and ketone supplementation in cancer has really exploded. So it kind of is based on the phenomenon that cancer cells really take in a lot of glucose, way more than the rest of our kind of healthy cells. So whereas the brain in dementia or in Alzheimer's disease has a decreased ability to use glucose, cancer cells are remarkably reliant on getting in a lot of their energy. Yeah, absolutely. And they use that to make energy, but they also use that glucose to build new proteins and build new cells that can grow the tumor, if that makes sense.
So the glucose is cancer fuel.
Yeah, absolutely. And cancers can use a wide variety of the energy or the molecules in our body, but they do seem to have a pretty strong reliance on glucose specifically. And they don't do well when you remove glucose from them or even just reduce its availability to them. And simultaneously, because of some interesting molecular issues in cancer cells, they don't seem to be very efficient at utilizing ketones for energy. And so you have a scenario where if you get into ketosis, where your body's less relying on glucose, which is that good fuel for cancer, and more reliant on ketones, which cancer cells really don't seem to be as efficient at using. You can kind of metabolically stress the cancer. And what's interesting, and this has been shown in a lot of animal models, so the ketogenic and cancer is really in a preclinical stage right now, but they're becoming more and more clinical studies that are either recruiting or in progress to see the effects in humans. But what's interesting is that we're now realizing that ketones themselves seem to have direct anti-cancer effects.
Wow.
So apart from the energy difference of removing glucose, just supplying ketones to the cancer cells is damaging to them often. And so that's a really exciting
That is very
area of
exciting.
research.
And is what you're saying kind of universal? There's so many
There's
different
a lot
kinds
of different types of
cancers,
cancers,
but
yeah.
this
So
might be universal
the
application.
preclinical data suggests right now that most cancers are susceptible to this to some degree. Some maybe more than others.
Right.
But I would say as a whole, most cancers do seem to have these specific deficits which we're exploiting when we put ketosis on
It's
board.
extremely exciting to know that there may be supplements we can take or a way
Sure.
we can eat that can defeat
Absolutely.
cancer. And that's coming through the work in your lab and in your colleagues' lab. It's very good to know. Now, your work and this whole field is beginning to attract more attention. So people have found you, people who have family members in distress and with brain issues. Can you tell us about some of the stories that you've encountered?
Yeah. So early on, I mean, for 5 or 6 years now, we realized that the ketogenic diet was really the cornerstone of what could be a very powerful metabolic therapy. And we published a paper and started getting people interested in our research. And when they reached out to us, they wanted to, they've either failed the standard of care which is chemo, surgery, radiation, and chemo. So is really kind of what most people do if they have aggressive forms of cancer. And the first person to reach out to me had a glioblastoma. And he was not in the United States, but wanted to incorporate this into his therapy because his brain tumor was so large that they couldn't do surgery on it. So he implemented the diet, and his tumor shrank to the point where they could actually go in and remove part of the glioblastoma. Is probably one of the most rapidly growing deadly cancers that we know of. And it kind of resonates in my head because he was like really the first person to reach out to me, and that was over 5 years ago, about 5 years ago. He's still alive today. And if you know anything about glioblastomas, you about 1 year, give or take a few months. And if you go beyond 3 years, you're an outlier. You're like in that 5%. If you go 5 years, you're in like the 2% range.
That's stunning.
So that individual actually sends me every Christmas. He sends me some pictures of him and his family traveling in different places.
How wonderful.
The second person to really connect with me and implement it was Dr. Fred Hatfield. And Dr. Hatfield's kind of a local guy here in Tampa area or Clearwater area. And he was actually picked up by the news, and they did a story on him. He had prostate cancer, and it spread to his bones. And we know that in males that have metastatic bone cancer, about 85% of them got it because their prostate cancer was radiated. So the radiation that's used to hit the prostate cancer caused it to spread to the pelvis.
How awful.
And he had really extreme bone pain at the time when we met, like he couldn't stand up and everything. And he implemented the diet. Having a sports background and a nutrition background, he understood the science behind it and was able to implement it in a very strict manner, and including periodic fasting and then transitioning into a ketogenic diet that was, eggs and sardines, I think, olive oil, coconut oil, and rapidly recovered. So Dr. Fred Hatfield is alive today, and he's the president of ISSA, which certifies people for personal training, and he goes around the world and he gives lectures on, he's got many world records. I think he's written like 60 or 70 books. So he's now continuing kind of like he was in the prime of his life and continuing to educate people on his passions.
That's incredible. So let's just
so
take
that's
a moment
two examples
to just,
of early on.
remark upon the fact that there's two people, one with brain cancer and one with painful bone cancer, are now active and restored to health, to functional health. That's stunning.
It's not a cure, though. So I
Yeah,
always
it's not a
like
cure.
to, and some people may respond better than others, but I think it needs to be a cornerstone. So medical, oncology really ignores the potential of dietary interventions to metabolically manage a disorder, and they completely ignore this. And we know that it can, even a cancer that's not very reactive or not very responsive to the ketogenic diet, at the very least it's going to slow its growth down to some extent. So you may not be able to stop the cancer or put it into remission, but you're taking the gas pedal off of the accelerator, right? You're taking your foot off the accelerator.
To go to our fueling analogy there.
And you're restricting its primary source of fuel for energy and for growth. So if you restrict the fuel and push your body to transition to a new fuel system, the cancer does not have the metabolic flexibility that the brain has, for example, and it defaults back to sugar metabolism, and it has damaged mitochondria. It has damaged energy systems that allow it to derive energy from ketone molecules. So you're really marginalizing its capacity for growth, but by doing that. And it also makes it more vulnerable to any modalities you throw on top of that. That could be chemo or radiation. So you're sensitizing the tumor to other modalities. That could be immune therapy, different forms of chemotherapy and radiation could probably be much more effective at a lower dose. And we have a colleague, Dr. Brent Reynolds at University of Florida. He's doing just that. So he's looking at brain tumor patients and has done some elegant work showing that he can sensitize the cancer cells to various standard of care drugs that are already out there by putting the cells or putting the animals on a ketogenic diet. Then it makes therapies actually effective.
Now, this is stunning work in cancer. What about, let's return to Alzheimer's and dementia, and then maybe some other neurodegenerative diseases that may respond to this kind of diet. Have you had family members dealing with loved ones with Alzheimer's, with dementia, reach out to you? Have you seen personal recoveries from this kind of supplementation?
Yeah, I think, the earliest would be Dr. Mary Newport, and we connected in 2009. I saw the story, and I actually had the opportunity to meet Steve, and I gave a lecture in a medical science class and about coconut oil and MCT oil, and she came to the lecture. I did half, and Dr. Mary Newport did the other half, and Steve was there sort of in the audience with the students, and then we went out to lunch afterwards, and I saw his tremor. He was shaking, and it was his time to get coconut oil and medium chain triglycerides, and Mary was kind of whispered, watch his hands after he takes the supplement. About 20 minutes later, and his tremor completely stopped, and he became more animated, and that was early on. Alzheimer's is, we don't have a cure for it, and ketones are, at this point in time, are not the cure, but it is a way to manage the symptoms. And in some cases, in his case, and I would venture to say about 30% of people with Alzheimer's have a Alzheimer's pathology that's very responsive to a metabolic therapy. So they will get clinically objective data to show that you can increase, cognitive capacity. And I'm going to kind of going out on a limb and saying that, but based on the feedback that I've had and talking with other doctors that understand this approach. And how could it not, right? So what we eat gives our brain energy. So a doctor, a neurologist that's attempting to manage this disorder needs to look at what the person's eating. And when they do slide into Alzheimer's, they're probably not making the best choices, right? Or they're not giving their brain the proper nutrition that it needs to function optimally or stave off the progression of that disease. So really we need to educate our medical students, and Dr. Poff and I we lecture to the medical students here, and we think it's important to even get nutrition into the medical school curriculum.
Which it isn't.
It's the cornerstone of our health, but it's not. Nutrition. But the students want it. They're, no pun intended, they're very hungry for this information.
I believe
and they want it to be taught.
Dr. D'Agostino, I think you made an important point that there isn't a cure for Alzheimer's. And in these video interviews that I'm doing, I'm not looking for a single cure because at the moment, until we can take magic powder there and make it all go away, that's not where we are now. So what we're looking at is trying to come at Alzheimer's and other dementias from multiple viewpoints to make that. So I've spoken to a sleep doctor and doctors who are specialists in supplements and activities that stimulate the brain. We're trying to come at it from every possible direction. How can we help people we love get better? And it's so key. How can we help them with the fuel for their brain, the most basic thing? You pointed out the brain is the most metabolically active organ in the body, using up something like 20 to 25% of all energy that's used in the body. So it seems that finding the way to most efficiently fuel a damaged brain is a very big part of what we have to do to help people we love. So how would we go through the day? If we're caring for somebody, what would we be looking at? How would we be feeding them, and how would we be supplementing them and are there other activities that we can do? What are we going to do to get those ketone bodies up there in their blood?
The education is key, and I think there's a lot of online resources that you can go to. It's a fantastic website. Ellen Davis runs it. She's a nutritionist and has some of our research on there, but it's very comprehensive. So you can just click on, ketogenic diet for type 2 diabetes, for brain health, for cancer. I mean, there's lots of different links and links within links that can guide you on your education on understanding the benefits and how to implement the diet. But the first approach I would take is simply, most people eat too many sugars, too many processed carbohydrates. So I would decrease the amount of consumed carbohydrates to under 100 grams per day, and then work towards reducing that further, possibly to 50 grams or less per day, and incorporating in place of the carbohydrates healthy fats. So that would be things like coconut oil, medium chain triglyceride fats you can buy, which are derived from coconut oil and palm oil. Monounsaturated fats are great. Nuts are a great source of that. Avocado, olive oil, even butter. So what we thought was dangerous artery clogging fat, the saturated fats, we now know, were demonized for the wrong reason. And, the science is emerging now that coconut oil is a saturated fat.
You're right.
And
So people are afraid of saturated. We've all been conditioned to be terrified. Fat.
Yes. So paying, education and reducing the amount of consumed carbohydrates in place of healthy fats. I'm a big proponent of fish. So eating healthy, sustainable types of fish out there, I think it's important to, if you're going to buy salmon, if you're going to buy, the store-bought fish, try to get wild-caught sustainable instead of fish that has been fed corn, which will have a different fatty acid profile than the fish that are caught in the wild. I kind of prefer wild-caught sardines that are, eating what they're supposed to be eating, in the wild. And the omega-3 fatty acids that are a part of, the fish's diet get incorporated in the fish. And omega-3s are brain food. Fish is brain food, really. So the outer membrane of the phospholipid membrane and the fatty acids that are part of our brain really get restored and replenished when we eat these foods, and it helps lower inflammation. And we know that lower sugar, elevating ketones, omega-3 fatty acids are three things right there that can help to reduce systemic inflammation in our body and help to prevent the brain from basically falling into a pathological chronic age-related state of cognitive decline.
Does this mean that everybody should be on is this how everybody should eat? Even when you're in your 20s and your 30s, should you be attempting to fuel your brain with ketones rather than glucose? Is that just the preferred state, or is this?
I don't think so. I think so. As we age, our carbohydrate tolerance declines pretty aggressively after about 30 to 40 to 50s and 60s. Our ability to eat carbohydrates and not gain weight and rapidly falls off.
That's why you gain weight as you get older, because the carbs that you could process when you were younger you no longer so efficiently process.
Very big part of it. We can delay that a little bit with exercise. As we build muscle is very hungry for glucose and helps us keep our glucose in check. But generally speaking, our tolerance for a certain level of carbohydrates decrease as we age. And that's not the case with ketones or with fatty acids, really. So I think as we age, we should be transitioning more to a low-carb diet and incorporating these food products, whether it be coconut oil or MCT or maybe the ketone supplements I mentioned, into the diet for normal, healthy aging and for preventative reasons. As Angela said, we know that, we're all probably have some form of cancer in our body, precancerous cells, which cancer takes years or even decades to develop and turn into a tumor. And if we come in early and implement a metabolic approach that can reduce the growth and proliferation of the tumor, it gives our immune system a time to detect it and kill it. So the immune system does its job, and it does its job better if we have lower inflammation. If we're chronically inflamed all the time, our immune system is kind of activated in a way, or preoccupied in a way, that can allow for cancer cells to grow because your immune system's busy doing something,
doing something else.
and then it doesn't. It's the same thing if we have some kind of chronic viral illness, we're more likely to get certain forms of cancer, right? Because our immune system is activated, and then it can there's an oversight, and our immune system isn't robust enough to do both jobs at once.
Things. It's interesting that you mentioned that about the cancer essentially lurking maybe for decades before it gets the opportunity to manifest. And the same thing we now know about Alzheimer's. I mean, we now know that from brain scans and so forth, that we see the beginnings of it sometimes in people in their 20s if we look at brain images. So is that another argument then for beginning to transition as you get older to this way of eating?
I think, I'm a big fan of the low-carb diet. Obviously, I'm biased because my research is on low-carb diets and ketogenic diet and ketone supplements, but you can't deny the science. And whether it be, preclinical studies that we do or the existing ketogenic diet studies that are out there, many of them have not been conducted in the right way because nutrition research is very hard to do, right? It's a lifestyle with all these variables.
right.
But there's overwhelming evidence, and the balance of the evidence shows that when you implement a low-carb, a well-formulated ketogenic diet or low-carb diet, you have like 5 things that I think are really important for your overall health and prevention. So your blood pressure goes down, your heart rate will follow and go down with that, your blood glucose will go down, your insulin will go down, and high levels of insulin, hyperinsulinemia is and your C-reactive protein will go down. That's a state of inflammation. And paradoxically, your blood fats go down, your triglycerides go down. So all these biomarkers kind of shift in the right direction with low-carb diets, and a very strict ketogenic diet that's very high in fat can elevate your LDL cholesterol, and that's the main thing that doctors will sometimes point out, but the balance of the evidence does not really indicate that that's even important anyway, especially when all the other biomarkers are going in the right direction. If you have, one thing that goes in a direction that's kind of questionable, that LDL particle or the LDL molecule is just an indication that your body's kind of metabolizing and processing more fat to begin with. So that could be brought up by your doctors, and that's usually associated with the very high-fat ketogenic diet. But the modified Atkins or modified ketogenic diet, which is about 60% fat, maybe about 20 to 30% protein, with the balance being high fiber carbohydrates in the form of vegetables. Instead of you take out all the starches, the white stuff, the breads, the pasta, the white rice,
The potatoes?
the potatoes, and you just put in more salads, more greens, cauliflower, asparagus, stuff like that, spinach, kale.
Saute them in coconut oil.
Exactly,
And add a little
yeah,
olive
there's-
oil on top, and it's delicious.
There's lots of options you have with vegetables.
You're also combining this dietary approach sometimes with hyperbaric oxygen treatments. Is that correct? And in what conditions would that be appropriate?
Yeah. That was actually Dr. Poff's dissertation project, her
So we'll
PhD,
let
so
Dr.
I'll let her take it.
Tell us all about oxygen.
Sure. So, and I studied the ketogenic diet paired with hyperbaric oxygen in cancer.
In cancer. Okay.
Specifically. And so when we say hyperbaric oxygen, we're talking about breathing 100% oxygen. So air that we're breathing right now is about 21% oxygen.
Oh.
So breathing pure oxygen in a chamber, a hyperbaric chamber, where you can increase the barometric pressure. So in Tampa, we're at about sea level, which is 1 atmosphere. So in hyperbaric oxygen, you're increasing the amount of oxygen you breathe and the pressure at which you're breathing it. And essentially what it does is it aids oxygen delivery to the tissue. So more oxygen gets into the tissue. And why that's important in cancer is because tumors, they grow very rapidly, but they have to form new blood vessels to carry the nutrients, carry the blood, carry the oxygen to the tumor. But they don't do this very well, and the blood vessels they make are very immature, and they don't actually do a good job at getting enough oxygen to the tumor. And so they form these low oxygen areas in the tumor. And you'd think maybe that would be, a detriment to the tumor, but as cancer typically does, uses that to its benefit, and actually promotes the growth of the tumor so that those hypoxic, or what we call low oxygen, which is hypoxia, areas in the tumor actually stimulate the growth of the tumor, make it more aggressive. And so hyperbaric oxygen allows more oxygen to get into the tumor and essentially kind of offset those tumor promoting effects of the hypoxia or the low oxygen. And we found that independently, when we give hyperbaric oxygen, at least in our cancer model, there was a modest anti-tumor effect. So it slowed the tumor growth maybe a little bit, but when we combined it with the ketogenic diet, I actually saw a very potent synergism between the two therapies, where together they were more effective than just adding the effects independently.
And this goes back to what we were talking about before with Alzheimer's, where we're trying to come at it from many directions
Absolutely.
that can hopefully complement each other, because there isn't a single one at this moment that we know of that is going to do
Right.
it. So could it be that hyperbaric oxygen treatment is a potential boon to people suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia in combination with this kind of a ketogenic diet?
That's a provocative question, I think, and it's going to take some research to answer that. We know that I study oxygen toxicity seizures as it pertains to the Navy SEAL diver. And at very high levels of oxygen up here, it's such a stimulant to the brain that it can cause a seizure. But when you're in the therapeutic range, you're giving the brain, you're actually stimulating the mitochondria of the cells, to use more fuel,
energy
to use more
factories.
oxygen, the energy factories. And we think that oxygen, when given perhaps in the right dose and maybe personalized to the individual, may be able to stimulate areas of the brain that otherwise wouldn't be stimulated. And this could have cognitive enhancement effects. And I'm talking with some physicians or hyperbaric physicians that are putting research together and studying this very phenomenon. And they're not only they're doing it in tandem with giving ketogenic nutrition or specific supplements. So give your brain the fuel that it needs and give it the oxygen, which is kind of like fuel too. Your brain consumes oxygen and your cells consume it and make CO2. So you're giving your brain, the oxygen is kind of like the gas that the fuel burns in, right? So you might be able to stimulate dormant areas of the brain or reactivate areas that were otherwise, not be activated. It's compelling. I've heard a lot of anecdotal reports that it works, but as a scientist, I have to dismiss it until we see the hard data.
Okay, so something perhaps in the future. Now, you've been so convincing that people with Alzheimer's, dementia, and let's just say a quick word before we end here. Other neurodegenerative diseases, I mean, they're related to brain deterioration. So we're talking about Parkinson's, for instance. Well, what other kinds of chronic diseases may respond to this kind of diet?
Well, we study what's called glucose transporter type 1 deficiency syndrome, GLUT1D, and that's a long word. But essentially what happens is that the gene that makes the protein for the glucose transporter, how the cell gets glucose into the cell, that transporter is deficient. And in kids that have this disorder, the brain does not get the glucose that it needs for proper growth and development and energy. And the ketogenic diet is actually the standard of care for this disorder, glucose transporter deficiency.
Right.
And we are doing experiments with the mouse model and testing the effects of ketone supplementation and testing it against the ketogenic diet. And we're doing motor function, we're looking at neurological aspects of the neurological function and doing, histology and looking at the blood. And eventually this comprehensive study will give us insight. Right now the kids need to be put on a very strict diet, whereas a supplement could be kind of like a magic bullet. You can come in there, and kids, it's difficult for
With
them
the
to comply
coconut
to a
powder,
diet.
the MCT powder,
and more
put it in their
synthetic forms,
milkshake.
and incorporate that into food. So we have some encouraging data coming out of that, and that's an ongoing study, and also Lou Gehrig's disease, also known as ALS.
ALS, yes.
So the Deanna protocol is what we are testing, and Deanna Tadone is an ALS patient that has been managing the disorder for, I think, going on 8 years. And if you
Long
know
time.
about ALS, when you're diagnosed, 3 years after you're diagnosed, there's like a 75% mortality. I mean, you're more likely to succumb to the disease within 2 to 3 years. So Deanna's, far past that point, and the Deanna protocol sort of originated from her father, Dr. Vince Tadone. He's a retired, very well respected and practiced orthopedic surgeon in the Tampa area. And when he retired and his daughter got ALS, he, with his medical training and his knowledge, went on the internet and read research article after research article and put together a comprehensive program called the Deanna Protocol. And within the Deanna Protocol, the most effective component of that program was the various supplements that were used. And alpha ketoglutarate, which can be bought at a health food store, is kind of like a ketone body. It's an energy substrate that's similar to ketones, medium chain triglycerides that I talked about,
Right.
The supplement GABA, and coenzyme Q10, which you're probably familiar with
Yes,
heart health.
sure.
It helps cells use the food that we eat and convert it into energy.
Mhm.
So these in combination significantly helped Deanna. And it was found that when they ran out of a particular supplement, which was the alpha ketoglutarate, her symptoms got worse, and then they had a compound pharmacist make more and then gave it to her, and then her symptoms resided, and that happened maybe twice. And so there's these observations that led him to put together the Deanna protocol, which worked very well for his daughter Deanna. So we have a mouse model of ALS that we did studies on, and we looked at motor function, we looked at neurological score, and we looked at total survival, and we found a statistically significant difference in the group of mice that were on the Deanna protocol, the ALS mice. They lived longer, and it helped to manage their neurological problems that they have. And the mouse model, it's important to acknowledge that it's a very aggressive model. There's multiple copies of the defective gene that produce the pathology. So it's kind of like it's a very aggressive form of ALS. So it makes experiments go fast, but
Right. Oh, I see.
some question whether it's even reflective of the disease. But we know in some people the disease does progress extremely fast. So in the mouse model, once they start getting the symptoms, it's within about 25 to 30 days they succumb to the disease. So we have that window of therapeutic window where we watch things happen when we give them these supplements. So it becomes kind of a very intense experiment when you're doing it. So,
Well, you
and it's a
mentioned-
metabolic therapy.
Uh-huh.
So I just like to make that point that this is targeting energy metabolism of the cells, and that's how it works. And there's no other ALS therapy that works in that way. So it's unique in that way to manage ALS, and there's no cure for ALS.
So this is a whole new realm of hope for managing symptoms, prolonging life, prolonging quality of life. And when you talked about supplements, many doctors that I've spoken to have recommended supplements such as CoQ10 for brain health, for cognitive decline, for Alzheimer's is one of them. So again, we're looking at this as putting together a whole program that's going to help, and part of it can be the supplementation with ketones and with eating in a low-carb, healthy fat way, and with appropriate supplementation. So and all of these, you continue to do the research to make this easier and more efficient for us to benefit from tomorrow. So, Dr. D'Agostino, you've made such a convincing case for the diet. Is there anybody who should not go on a ketogenic diet? Is it dangerous for anybody?
It's a good question. It's a personal choice, but when you do make the choice to do it, education is key. But I always recommend seeking out and consulting with a registered dietitian or nutritionist that I would like to say is savvy with low-carb ketogenic diets. And there's some contraindications of people who need to be cautious or even maybe not consider the diet. And that would be if you have existing liver pathology or liver dysfunction. Pancreatitis would be, some people have issues with high-fat diets. They just don't adapt well to high-fat diets. And if you've had your gallbladder removed, it may be difficult to transition to a high-fat diet. So your gallbladder makes bile, and bile is important for breaking down fatty foods and fatty acids. But it's important to acknowledge too that I know quite a few people who have communicated with me that have had their gallbladder out that do remarkably well on a ketogenic diet. So surprisingly,
It's a possibility.
yeah, they will do a low carb, kind of like a protein veggie diet, and then start adding fat back in, and they realize that they do pretty well, on a relatively modified ketogenic approach. But I always recommend that people get blood work. So, and things to look at with blood work would be your kidney function, look at liver function, your liver enzymes, and then look at your triglycerides. If your triglycerides are elevated, that means your body is not adapting well to a high-fat ketogenic diet. And it's important to acknowledge that it takes not a week or two, it takes a couple months to fully adapt to where you're getting the benefits of the ketogenic diet. When you start it, the first week or two, or the first month, you do get acute benefits from it, from being in a state of ketosis. You get rapid weight loss, and some people immediately start feeling the effects, but it's not until that second, third, and fourth month where after those chronic adaptations have happened that the ketogenic diet, the more you follow it, the easier it gets and the more benefits you start to derive from it. So that's important to acknowledge when you go into this journey of a different way of eating, that if you stick with it, you'll derive more benefits from it when you kind of stick with it and allow your body to transition to burning fat for fuel. It's a process.
It's a process.
I emphasize it's a process.
So make sure it's medically appropriate, that you don't have like a liver condition or a gallbladder condition that may not be right for this diet. Work with somebody, get the blood work done, and stay with it to let it get your body adapt and become more efficient with it over time.
Yeah, I recommend supplementing magnesium and also supplementing potassium in the form of potassium citrate, because one side effect of the diet that has been shown, at least in kids, is kidney stones. But they attributed that to dehydration. The kids weren't drinking that much, but when they did the study with a potassium supplement, they saw no significant elevation of kidney stones.
So magnesium and potassium supplementation as well.
Magnesium for cramps. So, and I actually had some calf cramps at night when I started doing the ketogenic diet, especially after the gym or exercise. I would get more likely to get calf cramps. And some of the studies show a decrease in magnesium when you're on the diet, and at least initially. So a supplementation in the form of magnesium. Actually, I think everybody should be supplementing magnesium.
On magnesium,
because magnesium citrate and magnesium glycinate are probably the two forms of magnesium that you want to get as a supplement.
So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And thank you so much for watching. And I hope you learned today about the possibility of giving your loved one a diet that's going to be ketogenic and is going to promote ketone bodies, and doing it additionally through supplementation such as the MCT powder, the coconut oil powder, and others that Dr. D'Agostino and Dr. Poff mentioned. So thank you very much. Hi, I'm Peggy Sarlin, here at the Awakening from Alzheimer's main office. We're down to the last 5 days of the event, and we've saved the best to last. Every interview coming up features a superstar, starting with Dr. Vincent Fortinese tomorrow. Dr. Fortinace's sterling credentials are too long for me to list here. He's a clinical professor of neurology at the University of Southern California and a renowned author, and he's even been named to the list of best physicians in America. He's treated Pope John Paul II, the Dalai Lama, and movie stars. Dr. Fortinace has developed the TEAM program. TEAM stands for Treatment of Early Alzheimer's and Mild Cognitive Impairment. And he reveals all the details tomorrow. And you can do the TEAM program at your home for free. It doesn't involve drugs or even supplements or foods. It's all about exercising the brain, or to be more exact, stimulating the brain. Now, you may have heard that you can help prevent memory loss by exercising the brain with crossword puzzles, things like that. But good luck with that, because it's not very effective, as Dr. Fortinace explains. The TEAM program is totally different, and it has reversed memory loss in 3 out of every 4 people that he has tried it with. In short, Dr. Fortinace has made an amazing discovery about the best, most effective way to stimulate the brain without drugs, and he is proving that it works. So this is front page news. You don't want to miss it. Check your email inbox tomorrow at 9 in the morning Eastern Time. The link is available for 24 hours. Be sure to watch. See you then.